Marcus Williams had always been the type of guy who spoke with his fists before his brain caught up. At 22, he stood 6 feet tall with broad shoulders that filled out his Marine uniform perfectly. His dark hair was cropped regulation short, and his brown eyes often held a challenging glint that had gotten him into trouble more times than he could count. But that same aggressive nature had also made him one of the most respected corporals in his unit at Camp Pendleton. The California sun beat down mercilessly as Marcus finished his afternoon training session. Sweat dripped from his forehead as he and his fellow Marines concluded another grueling round of combat exercises. The drill sergeant had pushed them harder than usual, preparing them for an upcoming deployment that everyone knew was coming but no one talked about directly. The tension in the air was thick, and tempers were running high among the troops. Marcus wiped his face with a towel and checked his watch. It was almost 1800 hours, which meant dinner time in the mess hall. His stomach growled loudly, reminding him that he had skipped lunch to spend extra time on the firing range. He had been trying to improve his marksmanship scores, knowing that every point could make the difference between staying stateside and being selected for the next overseas assignment. The mess hall at Camp Pendleton was always crowded during dinner hours. Hundreds of Marines would flood in, creating a constant buzz of conversation mixed with the clatter of trays and utensils. The building itself was nothing fancy, just a large utilitarian space with long tables and benches that could seat dozens of people at once. The smell of whatever the kitchen staff had prepared for the evening would fill the air, though the quality of military food was always a topic of debate among the troops. As Marcus approached the mess hall entrance, he could see the usual crowd gathering. Marines from different units mixed together, creating a sea of camouflage uniforms. Some were fresh-faced recruits who still looked nervous about everything, while others were seasoned veterans with multiple deployments under their belts. The hierarchy was always visible. Junior enlisted Marines showing respect to their superiors, while officers maintained their distance from the lower ranks. Marcus grabbed a tray and joined the serving line. Tonight's meal appeared to be some kind of chicken with rice and vegetables. The mess hall staff worked efficiently behind the counter, spooning out portions with practiced precision. Most of them were civilians who had been working there for years, and they knew exactly how much food each Marine expected on their tray. After getting his food, Marcus looked around for a place to sit. The mess hall was particularly crowded that evening, with most tables already full. He spotted his usual group of friends from his unit sitting at a table near the back of the room. Corporals Jenkins and Rodriguez were there, along with Private First Class Thompson, who was one of the newer guys in their squad. Making his way through the crowded mess hall, Marcus had to navigate between tables and around other Marines who were either getting up to leave or trying to find seats. The noise level was higher than usual, with everyone talking loudly to be heard over the general din. Somewhere in the background, a television was playing the evening news, though most people were ignoring it in favor of their own conversations. Marcus was almost to his table when it happened. He was carrying his tray with both hands, focused on not spilling his drink, when someone suddenly stepped directly into his path. Marcus, who had been moving at a steady pace, couldn't stop in time. He collided with the other person, his tray tilting dangerously as he tried to maintain his balance. The person he had bumped into was shorter than Marcus and had been facing away from him. The collision sent them stumbling forward, nearly causing them to fall. Marcus felt a surge of irritation rise in his chest. He had been having a rough day already, and this was just one more thing going wrong. "Hey, watch where you're going!" Marcus snapped, his voice carrying an edge of anger that made several nearby Marines turn to look. He steadied his tray and glared at the person who had gotten in his way. The person turned around slowly, and Marcus got his first good look at them. They appeared to be quite young, probably in their early 20s, with a slight build that made their uniform look a bit too large. Their hair was regulation length, and they wore the standard-issue glasses that many Marines had. What struck Marcus immediately was how calm they looked, despite having just been nearly knocked over. "Sorry about that," the person said quietly, their voice barely audible over the noise of the mess hall. They started to turn away, clearly not wanting to make a bigger deal out of the incident. But Marcus was not ready to let it go. The frustration of his difficult day, combined with his naturally aggressive personality, pushed him to escalate the situation further. He took a step closer to the other Marine, using his height and build to intimidate them. "Sorry doesn't cut it," Marcus said loudly, making sure his voice carried to the surrounding tables. You need to watch where you're walking. This isn't some civilian restaurant where you can just wander around aimlessly. Several Marines at nearby tables had stopped eating to watch the confrontation unfold. Some looked uncomfortable with the situation, while others seemed eager to see what would happen next. The young Marine that Marcus was confronting looked even smaller now, standing so close to his imposing frame. "I said I was sorry," they repeated, still speaking quietly but with a slight firmness in their voice that Marcus didn't appreciate. "It was an accident." Marcus felt his anger spike higher. He was used to other Marines backing down when he confronted them, especially junior enlisted personnel. The fact that this person was not immediately submitting to his dominance made him even more irritated. "An accident?" Marcus said, his voice getting louder. "You walk around like you own the place and call it an accident when you get in someone's way? Maybe you need to learn some respect." The young Marine's expression remained calm, but Marcus thought he could see a slight tightening around their eyes. They glanced around at the growing audience of Marines who were watching the confrontation, then looked back at Marcus. "I don't want any trouble," they said simply. "I'll be more careful." But Marcus was beyond the point of accepting a simple apology. His pride was on the line now, especially with so many other Marines watching. He couldn't back down without looking weak, and his reputation among his peers was something he valued highly. "You'll be more careful?" Marcus repeated mockingly. "What you'll do is show some proper respect when you're talking to me. Do you even know who you're talking to?" The question was rhetorical, meant to emphasize Marcus's seniority and intimidate the younger Marine. But something in the way the other person looked at him suggested that maybe they did know exactly who he was and that knowledge didn't particularly impress them. "I know you're a fellow Marine," came the quiet reply. "That should be enough." This response only made Marcus angrier. The implication that his rank and reputation meant nothing to this person was more insulting than if they had simply cursed at him. He took another step closer, now towering over the other Marine in a clearly threatening manner. "A fellow Marine?" Marcus said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Let me tell you something, Boot. I've been in this corps longer than you've probably been thinking about joining. I've earned my place here, and I deserve some respect from junior personnel." The young Marine's calm demeanor never wavered, which only served to frustrate Marcus further. Most people, especially younger Marines, would have been visibly nervous or angry by this point, but this person just stood there, taking Marcus's verbal assault without any apparent emotional reaction. Respect is earned through actions, not demanded through intimidation, the young Marine said quietly, but loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. The words hit Marcus like a slap in the face. Not only was this person refusing to back down, but they were actually challenging his behavior in front of other Marines. The watching crowd had grown larger, with Marines from several tables now openly staring at the confrontation. Marcus felt his face flush with anger and embarrassment. He had initiated this confrontation expecting an easy victory that would reinforce his status among his peers. Instead, he was being made to look like a bully by someone who appeared to be much junior to him in rank and experience. "You've got a smart mouth," Marcus said, his voice now loud enough to be heard across much of the mess hall. "Maybe it's time someone taught you when to keep it shut." He reached out and gave the young Marine a firm push on the shoulder. Not hard enough to knock them down, but enough to make his point clear. The push was a line crossed, a physical escalation that could have serious consequences if reported to the military police. The young Marines stumbled back a step but quickly regained their balance. For the first time since the confrontation began, their calm expression showed a crack. Not fear, but something that might have been disappointment or sadness. "You really don't want to do this," the young Marine said quietly, their voice carrying a note of warning that Marcus completely misinterpreted as a threat. "Is that supposed to scare me?" Marcus laughed harshly. "What are you going to do? Report me? Run crying to the MPs? Maybe you're not cut out for the Marine Corps if you can't handle a little physical contact." The crowd of watching Marines had grown even larger, and Marcus could hear murmurs of conversation as people tried to figure out what was happening. Some were pulling out their phones, probably to record what was unfolding. The situation was spiraling beyond what anyone had expected from a simple bump in the mess hall. Marcus raised his hand again, preparing to give the young Marine another push, this time harder. His adrenaline was pumping now, and his judgment was clouded by anger and the pressure of performing for his audience. All he could think about was putting this disrespectful junior Marine in their place and re-establishing his dominance. But before he could make contact, a new voice cut through the noise of the mess hall like a knife. "What the hell is going on here?" The voice carried absolute authority, the kind that could stop a room full of Marines dead in their tracks. Marcus's hand froze in midair as he turned to see who had spoken. The voice belonged to a tall, imposing figure in dress blues who was striding quickly toward their location. Marcus felt his stomach drop as he recognized the uniform and bearing of a high-ranking officer. This was not just any officer either. The silver eagles on the man's collar identified him as a full colonel, someone who commanded serious respect and could end careers with a word. The colonel's face was stern as he approached, his eyes taking in the scene quickly and efficiently. Behind him, Marcus could see several other officers following, including what appeared to be a major and a couple of captains. This was turning into a much bigger situation than Marcus had ever intended. "I asked what was going on here," the colonel repeated, his voice carrying easily across the now silent mess hall. Every Marine in the vicinity had stopped what they were doing to watch, sensing that something significant was happening. Marcus felt sweat break out on his forehead despite the air conditioning in the mess hall. He was still standing with his hand raised toward the young Marine, caught in the act of what clearly appeared to be harassment or assault. There was no way to make this look good, no explanation that would justify his behavior to a colonel. "Sir, there was just a misunderstanding," Marcus began, lowering his hand and trying to sound respectful. "This Marine bumped into me and I wasn't talking to you, Corporal." The colonel cut him off sharply. "I was talking to Captain Torres." "Captain?" He turned back to look at the young Marine he had been threatening, seeing them now with completely new eyes. The slight build, the calm demeanor, the confidence in the face of his aggression, it all made sense now. The young Marine Captain Torres straightened slightly and addressed the colonel with the professional bearing that Marcus should have recognized earlier. "Colonel Martinez, there was a minor collision in the serving line. Corporal Williams was expressing his displeasure with the situation. I was attempting to de-escalate, but he seemed determined to make it a bigger issue." Marcus felt like the world was spinning around him. Not only was the person he had been bullying an officer, but they were addressing a colonel by name, suggesting a familiarity that went beyond simple military protocol. He had just threatened and physically assaulted a captain in front of hundreds of witnesses, including multiple senior officers. Colonel Martinez's expression grew even more stern as he processed the captain's words. He looked at Marcus with the kind of disappointment that was far worse than anger. "Corporal Williams, is it?" the colonel said, his voice deceptively calm. "Would you care to explain to me why you were about to lay hands on one of my officers?" Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. How could he explain that he had assumed the person was a junior enlisted Marine? How could he justify his behavior even if that had been the case? There was no good answer to the colonel's question, and everyone in the mess hall knew it. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Marcus could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes on him, judging his actions and finding them wanting. His career, which he had worked so hard to build, was crumbling around him because of a moment of uncontrolled aggression. Captain Torres spoke again, their voice still calm and professional. "Colonel, if I may suggest, perhaps we could continue this discussion in a more appropriate setting." The suggestion was clearly meant to give Marcus some dignity and avoid making the situation even more public than it already was. But Marcus barely registered the kindness in the gesture, too stunned by the magnitude of his mistake to think clearly. Colonel Martinez nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving Marcus's face. "An excellent suggestion, Captain. Corporal Williams, you will report to my office immediately after you dispose of your meal. Captain Torres, I believe you and I have some things to discuss as well." The colonel's tone made it clear that this was not a request but an order. Marcus nodded numbly, still trying to process what had just happened. The mess hall around him remained silent, every Marine waiting to see what would happen next. As the officers began to move away from the confrontation site, the normal sounds of the mess hall slowly resumed. But Marcus could feel the stares and whispers following him as he mechanically picked up his tray and walked toward the disposal area. His appetite was completely gone, but he went through the motions of throwing away his untouched food. The walk to Colonel Martinez's office felt like a death march. Marcus's mind was racing, trying to figure out how he could possibly explain his actions or salvage his career. But the more he thought about it, the more hopeless the situation seemed. As he approached the administrative building where the colonel's office was located, Marcus realized that his life as he knew it was about to change forever. The aggressive nature that had served him well in combat training had just destroyed everything he had worked for. And the worst part was that he had brought it entirely upon himself. The young captain he had threatened could have destroyed him immediately in front of the entire mess hall. Instead, they had shown mercy by suggesting a private meeting. Marcus wasn't sure if that made him feel better or worse about what was to come. Standing outside Colonel Martinez's office waiting for permission to enter, Marcus Williams finally understood that some mistakes couldn't be undone. Some lines, once crossed, changed everything forever. And he was about to learn just how heavy the consequences of his actions could be. The administrative building at Camp Pendleton felt different at night. The usual hustle and bustle of daytime operations had given way to an eerie quiet, broken only by the distant sound of Marines conducting evening training exercises. Marcus Williams sat on a hard wooden bench outside Colonel Martinez's office, his hands clasped tightly in front of him as he waited for what felt like his execution. 20 minutes had passed since he had reported to the building as ordered. 20 minutes of sitting in silence, watching other Marines walk by and wondering if they knew what he had done. Some looked at him curiously, probably wondering why a corporal was sitting outside the colonel's office so late in the evening. Others avoided eye contact altogether, sensing that he was in serious trouble. The door to the colonel's office was solid wood, with frosted glass panels that revealed nothing of what was happening inside. Marcus could occasionally hear the murmur of voices, but the words were impossible to make out. He knew that Captain Torres was in there, probably giving their version of events to Colonel Martinez. The thought made his stomach twist with anxiety. Marcus tried to replay the events in the mess hall, looking for some way to justify his actions or minimize their impact. But every time he thought about it, the situation looked worse. He had physically assaulted an officer in front of hundreds of witnesses. There was no explaining that away, no matter how he tried to frame it. The captain had been so calm throughout the entire confrontation. Even when Marcus had pushed them, they hadn't retaliated or even raised their voice. That level of self-control suggested someone with significant training and experience, which made Marcus's assumption about their junior status even more embarrassing. A door opened down the hallway, and Marcus looked up to see a sergeant major walking in his direction. The man's face was impassive, but his presence alone was intimidating. Sergeant majors were the backbone of the Marine Corps, enlisted personnel who had earned their position through decades of exemplary service. This one looked like he had seen combat in multiple deployments, with the bearing of someone who had earned every ribbon on his chest. "Corporal Williams?" the sergeant major said, stopping in front of Marcus. "Yes, Sergeant Major," Marcus replied, standing immediately and coming to attention. "Colonel Martinez will see you now," the sergeant major said, gesturing toward the office door. "Follow me." Marcus's legs felt unsteady as he walked behind the sergeant major to the colonel's office. The door opened to reveal a spacious room with military decorations covering the walls and a large desk dominating the center. Colonel Martinez sat behind the desk, his expression unreadable. Captain Torres was seated in one of two chairs facing the desk, their posture professional but relaxed. "Corporal Williams reporting as ordered, sir," Marcus said, standing at attention in front of the desk. Colonel Martinez studied him for a long moment before speaking. "At ease, Corporal. Please take a seat." Marcus moved to the empty chair next to Captain Torres, hyper-aware of their presence beside him. Up close, he could see details he had missed in the mess hall. The captain wore several ribbons on their uniform, including some that Marcus recognized as combat decorations. This was not some inexperienced officer playing at being a Marine. "Corporal Williams," Colonel Martinez began, his voice measured and professional. "Captain Torres has given me their account of what happened in the mess hall this evening. Now I'd like to hear yours." Marcus swallowed hard, his mouth suddenly dry. He had been dreading this moment, knowing that there was no good way to explain his behavior, but he had to try. "Sir, I was walking through the mess hall with my dinner tray when Captain Torres stepped into my path. We collided, and I reacted poorly. I made assumptions about the situation and about Captain Torres that were completely wrong. I let my temper get the better of me, and I behaved in a manner unbecoming of a Marine." The colonel nodded slowly. "That's a surprisingly honest assessment, Corporal. Can you tell me what assumptions you made?" Marcus felt heat rise in his face. This was the most humiliating part of the entire situation. Sir, I assumed that Captain Torres was a junior enlisted Marine. I thought they were being disrespectful by not immediately backing down when I confronted them. And what led you to make that assumption? Colonel Martinez pressed. Marcus glanced at Captain Torres, who was listening impassively to the conversation. Sir, Captain Torres appears younger than I expected for their rank, and they were alone, not with other officers. I made judgments based on appearance, rather than taking the time to properly identify their rank. Colonel Martinez leaned back in his chair. Captain Torres, would you like to respond to any of this? The captain turned slightly to look at Marcus before addressing the colonel. Sir, Corporal Williams is correct that he made assumptions, but I think there's more to it than that. Even if I had been a junior enlisted Marine, his behavior would have been inappropriate. The issue isn't just that he mistook my rank, it's that he felt justified in physically intimidating someone he perceived as subordinate. The words hit Marcus like a punch to the gut because they were absolutely true. He had been ready to bully what he thought was a younger Marine, someone who couldn't fight back without facing serious consequences. The fact that his victim had turned out to be an officer only made the situation worse, but it didn't excuse his initial intent. Colonel Martinez nodded approvingly at the captain's observation. An excellent point, Captain. Corporal Williams, do you agree with Captain Torres's assessment? Marcus felt like he was sinking deeper into quicksand with every word. Yes, sir. Captain Torres is right. My behavior would have been wrong regardless of their rank. I was trying to intimidate someone I thought couldn't defend themselves, and that's inexcusable. The admission hung in the air for a moment. Marcus had just confessed to behavior that could end his career, but he couldn't bring himself to lie or make excuses. The truth was ugly, but it was still the truth. Colonel Martinez opened a folder on his desk and pulled out several papers. Corporal Williams, I've been reviewing your service record. You've been in the Marines for 4 years, with generally good performance reviews. Your marksmanship scores are excellent, and your physical fitness ratings are consistently high. Your squad leaders have noted your leadership potential, but they've also mentioned some concerns about your temper. Marcus wasn't surprised by this assessment. His anger issues had been a recurring theme throughout his career, though he had managed to avoid any major incidents until tonight. This isn't your first confrontation with other Marines, the colonel continued. There have been 3 previous incidents where you were counseled for aggressive behavior, though nothing as serious as tonight's events. The colonel set the papers aside and looked directly at Marcus. What I'm trying to understand, Corporal, is why an otherwise promising Marine would throw away his career over a minor bump in a mess hall. The question forced Marcus to confront something he had been avoiding for years. Why did he react so aggressively to perceived slights? Why did he feel the need to dominate other people to feel good about himself? Sir, I don't have a good answer for that, Marcus said honestly. I think I use aggression to feel important. When I thought Captain Torres was disrespecting me, it felt like a challenge to my status, and I couldn't let that go. I'd go back to the case if you got paid now the gore. Corporal, may I ask you something? Marcus turned to face them. Yes, sir. What do you think respect actually means in the military context? The question caught Marcus off guard. It seemed simple, but the more he thought about it, the more complex it became. Sir, I suppose it means following orders and showing deference to those of higher rank. Captain Torres shook their head slightly. That's obedience, not respect. Respect is something deeper than that. It's about recognizing the inherent worth of every person you serve with, regardless of their rank or position. It's about treating people with dignity because they've earned the right to wear the same uniform you do. The captain paused, then continued. When you demanded respect from me in the mess hall, what you were really demanding was submission. You wanted me to acknowledge your superiority based on what you perceived as your higher status. But true respect can't be demanded. It has to be earned through your actions and character. Marcus felt a growing sense of shame as he listened to the captain's words. Everything they were saying was right, and it highlighted just how wrong his approach to military relationships had been. Colonel Martinez had been watching this exchange with interest. Captain Torres, would you mind sharing your background with Corporal Williams? I think it might provide some useful perspective. The captain nodded. Certainly, sir. Corporal Williams, I graduated from the Naval Academy 3 years ago and was commissioned as a second lieutenant. I completed infantry officer training and served 2 deployments in Afghanistan before being promoted to captain last year. I'm currently on temporary assignment here at Pendleton while completing some specialized training. Marcus felt his shame deepen. Not only was Captain Torres an officer, but they were an academy graduate with combat experience. Everything about their background screamed competence and leadership, yet Marcus had been too blinded by his own prejudices to recognize it. The reason I'm sharing this, Captain Torres continued, is not to embarrass you further, but to illustrate a point. Rank and experience aren't always visible at first glance. More importantly, every Marine deserves to be treated with respect, regardless of what their background might be. Colonel Martinez leaned forward. Corporal Williams, I'm faced with a difficult decision here. What happened tonight was a serious breach of military discipline. You physically assaulted an officer in front of hundreds of witnesses. Under normal circumstances, that would result in court-martial proceedings and likely a dishonorable discharge. Marcus felt his heart sink. A dishonorable discharge would follow him for the rest of his life, affecting his ability to get jobs, housing, and benefits. Everything he had worked for would be wiped out by one moment of poor judgment. However, the colonel continued, Captain Torres has requested that I consider alternative disciplinary measures. They've suggested that your behavior, while inexcusable, might be correctable through appropriate intervention. Marcus looked at Captain Torres in surprise. After everything he had done to them, they were advocating for mercy? It didn't make sense. Captain Torres seemed to sense his confusion. Corporal, I don't believe you're a bad person. I think you're someone who has developed some unhealthy patterns of behavior that need to be addressed. Ending your career might feel like justice, but it wouldn't actually solve the underlying problem. The captain turned to address Colonel Martinez. Sir, if I may suggest, Corporal Williams might benefit from anger management counseling combined with some additional training on leadership and military bearing, perhaps a temporary reduction in rank with the opportunity to earn it back based on demonstrated improvement. Marcus couldn't believe what he was hearing. This officer whom he had humiliated and assaulted was arguing for his rehabilitation rather than his destruction. It was a level of magnanimity that he wasn't sure he would have shown if their positions were reversed. Colonel Martinez considered the suggestion. That's a very generous recommendation, Captain. Are you certain you don't want to press charges? I'm certain, sir, Captain Torres replied firmly. I think Corporal Williams has learned something important tonight. With the right guidance, he could become the kind of leader the Marine Corps needs. Corporal Williams, you're incredibly fortunate to have Captain Torres advocating for you. However, I want you to understand that this generosity comes with conditions. You will be reduced in rank to Lance Corporal, effective immediately. You will attend mandatory anger management counseling for the next 6 months. You will also participate in a leadership development program designed to help you understand what it means to be a positive influence on other Marines. Marcus nodded eagerly. Yes, sir. I understand. Furthermore, the colonel continued, any future incidents of aggressive behavior will result in immediate court-martial proceedings. This is your one chance to correct course. Don't waste it. I won't, sir. Thank you for this opportunity. Colonel Martinez stood, indicating that the meeting was concluded. Captain Torres, thank you for your wisdom in handling this situation. Excuse me, Lance Corporal Williams, you're dismissed. Report to your squad leader tomorrow morning to discuss your new duties and schedule. As they left the colonel's office, Marcus walked beside Captain Torres in silence. The hallway felt different now, less like a path to his doom and more like a second chance at redemption. When they reached the exit, Marcus finally found his voice. Captain Torres, I don't know how to thank you for what you did in there. The captain stopped and turned to face him. You can thank me by becoming the Marine I believe you can be. Use this experience to grow, not as something to forget and move on from. I will, sir. I promise. Captain Torres studied his face for a moment, then nodded. I believe you will, Lance Corporal. Good night. As Marcus watched the captain walk away into the night, he realized that his entire understanding of leadership and respect had been fundamentally changed. He had learned that true strength came not from intimidating others, but from lifting them up. And he had learned that mercy, when given to someone who didn't deserve it, could be more powerful than any punishment. The road ahead would not be easy. He would have to rebuild his reputation, regain the respect of his peers, and prove that he deserved the second chance he had been given. But for the first time in years, Marcus Williams felt like he was moving in the right direction. Walking back to his barracks under the stars, Marcus made a silent promise to himself and to Captain Torres. He would become worthy of the faith that had been placed in him. He would learn what it meant to be a true Marine, not just someone who wore the uniform. And he would never again let his pride and anger destroy something good. The mess hall incident would be talked about for weeks among the Marines at Camp Pendleton. But Marcus was determined that when the story was finally told in full, it would be remembered not as a cautionary tale about the consequences of aggression, but as a testament to the power of second chances and the possibility of redemption. 6 months had passed since the incident in the mess hall that changed Marcus Williams's life forever. The California sun still beat down on Camp Pendleton with the same intensity, but everything else felt different to the man who now wore the chevron of a lance corporal instead of the crossed rifles he had once been so proud of. Marcus stood in formation with his squad, listening to Staff Sergeant Coleman brief them on their upcoming training exercise. The morning air was crisp, and the sound of boots on pavement echoed across the parade ground as other units conducted their own morning formations. Everything about this routine was familiar, yet Marcus experienced it now with completely different eyes. The anger management counseling sessions had been brutal at first. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the base psychologist, had a way of cutting through his defenses and forcing him to confront aspects of himself that he had spent years avoiding. She had helped him understand that his aggressive behavior stemmed from deep-seated insecurities about his own worth, and that he had been using intimidation as a way to feel powerful in a world where he often felt powerless. "Lance Corporal Williams," Staff Sergeant Coleman called out, interrupting his thoughts. "You'll be leading the 2nd Squad through the obstacle course today. Make sure they understand that this is about teamwork, not individual glory." "Yes, Staff Sergeant," Marcus replied, his voice steady and confident. 6 months ago, being chosen to lead anything would have fed his ego and made him feel superior to the other Marines. Now, he understood that leadership was about serving others, not being served by them. After formation, Marcus gathered the 7 Marines who would be under his temporary leadership for the training exercise. They were a diverse group: 2 privates fresh out of boot camp, 3 privates first class with a few months of experience, and 2 lance corporals who were his peers in rank. In the past, he would have immediately established dominance over the group through aggressive posturing. Today, he took a different approach. "All right, everyone," Marcus began, his tone conversational rather than commanding. "We're going to tackle the obstacle course as a team today. I know some of you have done this before, and others might be nervous about their first time. The goal isn't to see who's the fastest or strongest. It's to make sure everyone gets through successfully." Private Martinez, one of the newer Marines, raised her hand tentatively. "Lance Corporal, what if I can't keep up? I've been struggling with the rope climb." 6 months ago, Marcus would have seen this admission of weakness as pathetic and worthy of ridicule. Now, he saw it as an opportunity to help a fellow Marine succeed. "That's exactly why we're doing this as a team, Martinez. We'll make sure you get the help you need to master that rope climb. Lance Corporal Johnson here is excellent at it. He can give you some pointers." Lance Corporal Johnson nodded eagerly. "Absolutely. The key is technique, not just upper body strength. I'll show you a few tricks that'll make it much easier." As they walked toward the obstacle course, Marcus reflected on how much his perspective had changed. The leadership development program had taught him that real leaders didn't just bark orders. They developed other people's capabilities and helped them achieve things they didn't think were possible. The obstacle course at Camp Pendleton was designed to test every aspect of a Marine's physical and mental capabilities. It included wall climbs, rope traverses, mud crawls, and various other challenges that required strength, agility, and coordination. But more than that, it was designed to build unit cohesion by forcing Marines to work together to overcome obstacles. As they began the course, Marcus found himself naturally falling into a coaching role. When Private Thompson struggled with the tire run, Marcus ran alongside him, offering encouragement and technique tips. When Private First Class Rodriguez hesitated at the top of the wall climb, Marcus was there to talk him through his fear of heights. "You've got this, Rodriguez," Marcus called up to him. "Just focus on one hand at a time. Don't look down, look at where you want to go." The old Marcus would have been frustrated by Rodriguez's hesitation, seeing it as a sign of weakness that reflected poorly on his leadership. The new Marcus understood that fear was natural and that helping someone overcome it was one of the most important things a leader could do. Halfway through the course, they came to the rope climb that Private Martinez had been worried about. She stood at the bottom of the rope, looking up with obvious anxiety. Marcus could see that she was psyching herself out before she even tried. "Martinez, come over here for a second," Marcus said, pulling her aside from the group. "I can see you're nervous about this. Want to tell me what's going through your head?" "I've failed this 3 times in training, Lance Corporal," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm scared I'm going to embarrass myself again." "Failure is just information, Martinez. It tells you what doesn't work so you can try something different. You're not the same Marine you were during those previous attempts. You've been training hard, and you're stronger now." He gestured toward Lance Corporal Johnson. "Johnson is going to demonstrate the technique, and then he's going to spot you while you try it. Even if you don't make it all the way up on the first try, we're going to keep working until you get it." The approach worked. With Johnson's guidance and the encouragement of the entire squad, Martinez made it halfway up the rope on her first attempt, farther than she had ever gone before. On her second try, she made it to the top, prompting cheers from the rest of the team. As they continued through the obstacle course, Marcus noticed something remarkable happening. The squad was starting to function as a real team, with the more experienced Marines naturally helping the newer ones, and everyone supporting each other through the challenges. This was what leadership was supposed to look like. Near the end of the course, they encountered another squad that was struggling with one of the obstacles. The squad leader, a corporal that Marcus recognized from his old unit, was berating one of his Marines for being too slow. Marcus felt a familiar flash of anger, not at the struggling Marine, but at the leader who was tearing him down instead of building him up. "You're holding up the entire squad, Patterson," the corporal was shouting. "Maybe you should have stayed in the civilian world if you can't hack it as a Marine." Marcus saw the effect these words were having on Patterson, whose shoulders were slumping with each verbal blow. The young Marine looked defeated and humiliated, exactly the way Marcus had made countless people feel over the years. Without thinking, Marcus jogged over to where the confrontation was happening. "Corporal Stevens, is everything okay over here?" Stevens turned to face Marcus, his expression annoyed at the interruption. "Everything's fine, Williams. Just trying to motivate one of my Marines. Mind if I offer a suggestion?" Marcus asked, keeping his tone respectful but firm. "I've found that Marines usually perform better when they feel supported, rather than attacked." Stevens's face reddened slightly. "I don't need advice on leadership from someone who got busted down in rank, Williams." The comment stung, but Marcus had learned to manage his emotional reactions. Instead of responding with anger, he turned to Patterson. "Marine, what's your name?" "Private Patterson, Lance Corporal," the young man replied, standing a little straighter. "Patterson, I can see you're having trouble with this obstacle. It's a tough one. I struggled with it myself when I was starting out. Want to try a different approach?" For the next few minutes, Marcus worked with Patterson, showing him a technique for distributing his weight differently and using his legs more effectively. With this new approach, Patterson was able to complete the obstacle successfully. "See?" Marcus said, clapping Patterson on the shoulder. "You had the ability all along, you just needed to find the right technique." Patterson beamed with pride, and Marcus could see the confidence returning to his posture. Corporal Stevens watched this interaction with obvious discomfort, perhaps recognizing that his approach had been counterproductive. As Marcus rejoined his own squad, Lance Corporal Johnson fell into step beside him. "That was pretty cool what you did back there, Marcus. Stevens is known for being a hard-ass, but I've never seen anyone call him out on it before." "I wasn't trying to call him out," Marcus replied thoughtfully. "I was just trying to help Patterson. 6 months ago, I would have been doing the same thing Stevens was doing, maybe worse." "What changed?" Johnson asked. Marcus considered the question as they approached the final obstacle of the course. "I guess I learned that making other people feel small doesn't make you bigger. Real strength comes from lifting people up, not putting them down." The final obstacle was a team exercise that required all 8 Marines to work together to get everyone over a 12-foot wall with no handholds. It was impossible for anyone to complete alone. Success depended entirely on cooperation and trust. Marcus gathered his squad around him. "Okay, everyone, this is what we've been building toward all day. We're going to get everyone over this wall, and we're going to do it together. I need everyone to think of themselves as part of a single unit, not as individuals competing against each other. They formed a human pyramid, with the strongest Marines at the bottom providing a platform for others to climb up. As each Marine reached the top of the wall, they turned around to help pull the next person up. Marcus made sure he was one of the last to go over, ensuring that everyone else made it safely first. When they had all successfully completed the obstacle course, the squad spontaneously broke into cheers and congratulations. Marcus felt a sense of accomplishment that was completely different from anything he had experienced before. This wasn't about his personal success. It was about what they had achieved together as a team. As they walked back toward the barracks, Private Martinez fell into step beside Marcus. "Lance Corporal, can I ask you something? What's on your mind?" "Some of the other Marines have told me stories about you from before, about how you used to be. But you're nothing like they described. What happened to change you?" Marcus smiled, thinking about that night in Colonel Martinez's office and the officer who had shown him more mercy than he deserved. "I learned the difference between demanding respect and earning it, and I learned that the best leaders are the ones who make everyone around them better." They had almost reached the barracks when Marcus spotted a familiar figure walking across the courtyard. Captain Torres looked exactly the same as they had 6 months ago. Calm, professional, and completely in control of their environment. Marcus hadn't seen them since that night in the colonel's office, though he had heard through the grapevine that they had completed their specialized training and been reassigned to a new unit. "Squad, go ahead and get cleaned up," Marcus told his Marines. "I'll catch up with you in a few minutes." He jogged across the courtyard to intercept Captain Torres before they disappeared into one of the administrative buildings. "Captain Torres, sir." The captain turned and smiled when they recognized Marcus. "Lance Corporal Williams. It's good to see you. How have you been?" "Good, sir. Really good. I wanted to thank you again for what you did for me that night. I know I didn't deserve your mercy, but I've tried to make the most of the second chance you gave me." Captain Torres studied his face for a moment. "You look different, Williams. More at peace with yourself." "I feel different, sir. The counseling helped me understand a lot about myself, and the leadership program taught me what I should have learned years ago. I'm not the same person who pushed you in the mess hall. I never doubted that you could change," Captain Torres said. "The question was whether you wanted to change. It looks like you found your answer." Marcus nodded. "Yes, sir. I finally understand what you meant that night about respect being earned through actions and character. I've been trying to live up to that standard every day since then." Captain Torres glanced at their watch. "I'm actually running late for a meeting, but I'm glad we had a chance to talk. Keep up the good work, Williams. The Marine Corps needs more leaders like the one you're becoming." As Marcus watched Captain Torres disappear into the building, he reflected on the long journey that had brought him to this moment. 6 months ago, he had been a corporal on the fast track to destroying his career through his own arrogance and aggression. Today, he was a lance corporal who had learned what it meant to be a true leader and a better human being. The reduction in rank had been humbling, but it had also been liberating. He no longer felt the need to constantly prove his superiority over others. Instead, he focused on being the kind of Marine that others could look up to and learn from. He had discovered that helping other people succeed was far more satisfying than any personal achievement. That evening, as Marcus lay in his bunk reflecting on the day's events, he thought about Private Patterson and how good it had felt to help him overcome his struggles. He thought about Private Martinez and the pride on her face when she finally conquered the rope climb. He thought about his entire squad and how they had functioned as a real team under his guidance. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to serve his fellow Marines. There would be more young Marines who needed guidance, more obstacles to overcome, and more chances to demonstrate the kind of leadership he had learned from both his failures and his successes. Marcus Williams had learned that redemption wasn't something that happened overnight. It was a daily choice to be better than you were yesterday, to serve others before serving yourself, and to use your strength to lift people up rather than tear them down. And he had learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is show mercy to someone who doesn't deserve it, because that mercy might be exactly what they need to become the person they're capable of being. The mess hall incident would always be a part of his story, But it would not define the rest of his career. Instead, it would serve as a reminder of how quickly pride and anger can destroy everything you've worked for, and how much you can achieve when you choose humility and service over dominance and aggression. As he drifted off to sleep, Marcus made the same promise he had made every night for the past 6 months. Tomorrow, he would be worthy of the second chance he had been given. Tomorrow, he would continue earning the respect he had once demanded. And tomorrow, he would be the kind of Marine that Captain Torres had believed he could become.